Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, there was a forest as old as time itself. There was a small settlement on the edge of the wood, but so few people chose to stay there for any longer than it took to pass through that no one could remember its official name. It was known only for its vicinity to the forest, and so was called the town next to the woods. A heavy iron gate defined the settlement's current limits. There was no one in the town who had been in the area long enough to remember when exactly the gate had been built, but everyone knew why it was there. Fairies were not always kind, to trespassers or each other. Anyone brave or foolish enough to venture into the woods was never seen or heard from again. However, the woods still charmed those few that had made it their permanent backyard. The plant life was varied and beautiful, especially as autumn was just beginning. The leaves on the trees had turned from a monotonous green to an array of orange, yellow, red, and brown almost overnight, interspersed with touches of dark green needles. It was enough to make travelers linger a day or two more. Within this forest there was a room underground. It was dark and small, but not confining. Rather, the woman inside thought the inviting smells of the earth and the plants that lined the dirt shelves made the place cozy. She didn't feel like getting up, even though she knew that her legs would soon grow restless for the open road that would lead her to the next small room on the outskirts of the next small town, and she would be just as content there. Smoke filled her vision and her nostrils. The fresh air became ash in her mouth. The fire had taken hold of all her senses, and she struggled to find a way out of it, only to discover that her hands and feet were bound and her back was straight against a wooden pole. She fought harder, struggled more, and though she went nowhere, she was sure that she felt something shift and give way to her clawing hands. Anne woke from the nightmare with a start, disturbing the cool grass beneath her and sending a small moth flittering into the light breeze. The ground around her fingers had little gouges in it. The sensation of digging into it must have brought her out of her dream. She was sitting on top of a hill. Around her there were trees of every sort, and between them grew clumps of fern and tall grass. The ground was littered with leaves in all shades of red and yellow. It was a calming scene after such a horrific nightmare, and Anne decided to take her time cleaning the dirt out from under her nails to enjoy it. She opened up her satchel and rummaged through it. Inside were some clothes, a few things for personal hygiene, and a coin purse full of gold. She reached in as far as she could, all the way up to her shoulder, but there wasn't anything else in the bag. It certainly was deep for such a small thing. Anne stood, dusted off her pants, and tossed the strap of the satchel over her shoulder. She had seen all there was to see from where she was sitting, and there must be more to see outside the small clearing. She chose a direction at random and started walking, the tips of the ferns brushing against her hands as she passed through them. She came across a stream soon enough and leaned down, sinking her knees into the soft mud while she cupped her hands to drink. Once she had swallowed a few handfuls of water, she noticed a pair of boots sitting by the river. They were worn and beaten up, like her satchel. Maybe she'd been here before. Anne fished a pair of socks out of her bag and put them on, then the boots, and set off walking again along the stream. She couldn't feel the mud squelching between her toes anymore, but the boots looked nice and protected her feet from rocks, so she decided it was better to wear them. She walked far longer than she thought she would. The shadows of the trees grew darker and denser, and the once pleasant breeze started to nip at her exposed arms. She put on a sweater she found in the bag and kept going. Twilight cast a red glare over the sky. The leaves, once bright and warm, now looked like the glowing embers of a fire that reminded Anne of her nightmare. The wind had grown more hostile, and even with her sweater on she kept her arms clutched close to her chest as she walked. The sun set quickly, or perhaps she lost track of time again. Soon it was completely dark, save for the fireflies that hovered around her. She could hear animals much larger than squirrels moving through the thick underbrush, marked by the occasional snapping of a twig or frightened shrieks of smaller animals. A flash of red caught her eye, darker and shapelier than the leaves. In the near distance Anne could see a figure in a scarlet cloak. The hood was drawn up, and the figure had their back to her. She could have crept by, and was considering doing just that, until the figure turned and revealed the profile of a sturdy woman with a stern expression. A basket hung from the crook of her arm. Anne kept an eye on the woman, captivated for a moment, and the woman saw her. Their gazes locked, and Anne knew that if she was going to run, she had only a few brief seconds to make up her mind and do it. But there was something in the woman's eyes that kept her still. They were deep and somehow older than the rest of her. Her pale blue eyes appraised Anne, and for that moment she wanted the approval of this woman more desperately than she could explain.
"What are you doing in the forest, alone?"
didn't know I was alone.
You surely are not now. But that only answers one part of my question. What are you doing in the forest?
I was following the flowers. And after that, I was chasing a squirrel, and then I followed the flowers again, and now I'm talking to you.
You smell of earth. Have you been in the forest all day?
Yes.
How very odd. Now that it is dark, you must be on your way back to where you came from. The forest is not safe at night. Which way is your home?
Anne thought for a long moment. She thought about what color the walls of her room were painted, how far away it was from the kitchen, and the face of the person that she had said goodbye to when she left to go for a walk in the woods. Her memory showed her nothing. She felt like she ought to know all those things, but couldn't recall any of them.
Are you lost?
I think so. Could you point me in the right direction? I must live in a town nearby. I just got carried away exploring and lost track of where I am, that's all.
There is a town to the west of here. It is small, but there are a few permanent residents. Unfortunately, the gates close at dusk, and you will never make it on time now. You should be able to reach it if you set off by a decent hour tomorrow. That still leaves the matter of where you will stay tonight. Ordinarily, I would offer my home. However, I think I know just where you should go.
You do?
Yes. But before you go, I must prepare you. There are things you should know and things to be done. First, you must know this forest is a wonder to behold by day, but at night all manner of dangerous animals and dark creatures come out. This is what makes it unsafe for the unarmed, such as yourself. Hold still now. You need to be at least somewhat presentable.
The woman set her basket down and adjusted the cross-stitched cloth that covered the items inside. She retrieved a comb from the basket. The comb was barely able to make any real change to her tangles, though it did get a few locks a little straighter. After quite some time of pulling and fighting with the mess of waves, the woman gave up.
That will just have to do.
Where am I going?
The home of a fairy.
A fairy?
And now for the rest of what you must know. Fairies are capricious by nature, but even they have rules that they must follow. For example, if you greet a fairy by offering a gift and call him what he is, then he will be obligated to treat you with hospitality for 1 week. This should be far more than you need if you live in the town next to the woods. So long as you pay your host the proper respects and have good manners, he should not be inclined toward playing tricks on you.
The woman offered Anne a loaf of bread, and she held it carefully in her hands.
Thank you.
You are welcome, my dear. Unfortunately, I cannot make the journey with you. I have other business in the forest tonight, and the home of this fairy lays far out of the way where I am going. Keep going north, into the pine forest, until you can see the mountains over the treetops. That is when you will know you are getting close, and you will be able to climb a tree and see the towers of his castle.
What sort of fairy is he?
You need not worry about that. Remember, he is bound by fairy law to show you hospitality once you offer the bread and reveal that you know what he is.
Thank you again, ma'am.
Forgive my manners. You may call me Tanya.
Tanya! That's a beautiful name. Mine is Anne.
Yours is a good name as well. Quite fitting. Now, you really should get going. Remember, north until you can see the mountains, then look for the castle towers.
I've got it, and I won't forget.
Farewell for now, my dear.
The girl started walking to the northern end of the woods. Before long, the leaves at her feet gave way to pine needles, and soon she was walking through nothing but pine trees. The forest was thinner there, and in no time at all she was able to peer between the tall, angular treetops to see the moonlight reflecting on the distant snow-capped mountains. She took a moment to look for the tree with the lowest, sturdiest branches, tucked the bread loaf into her satchel, made a running start, and clawed her way up the tree. It took a moment for her to find anything resembling a castle tower, but she did spot them. They were almost pure white and blended in with the forest and mountains, but they were definitely towers. And the castle wasn't too far. The knowledge that the castle was so close gave Anne fresh vigor as she almost skipped toward the glassy towers. By the time she reached the courtyard, the moon was high in the sky. For a moment she wondered how she would climb over the tall gate and clear the sharp spires at the top, especially since the gate appeared to be made of ice. Then she realized she was small enough to easily slip between the bars and entered the snow-covered courtyard beyond. A cobblestone path led from the locked gate through mounds of snow, circling a fountain where other paths branched out to allow entry from west and east. The fountain wasn't running. Instead, the water droplets had been frozen in midair, creating an elegant ice sculpture. Other ice sculptures were arranged around the fountain, images of praying angels, prancing foxes, and stags with elaborate horns, all so meticulously crafted and detailed that at first Anne thought they were real. The whole place shimmered and sparkled as if it were diamond. Intrigued and excited about what sort of fairy must live in such a wondrous place, Anne removed the bread from her bag and knocked on the front doors. Nicolas had nearly fallen asleep on his throne when there was a knock on the door. He adjusted the part in his hair and sat up straight. With a wave of his hand, the doors opened.
Intrude.
A woman, small and plain, pale, dirty skin and earthy brown hair, entered the castle. Nicolas did not recognize her, and waved his hand again to close the doors and keep her out, but she was already inside, so they closed and kept her in instead. She glanced back at the doors as they slammed, taking a few more steps inside and lifting her chin.
Greetings, fairy!
Do not come any closer. Identify yourself.
Oh, right. My name is Anne, and I've got this for you. It's right, I think. So, if it's not too much to ask, can I spend the night here?
Nicolas gripped the arms of his throne tightly. This had to be the most foolish human he had ever come across. True, he did not see them often, but usually when he was recognized by a human, they cowered in fear and awe of him. This one, Anne, a simple name for a simple creature, was not only completely unafraid, but asking favors of him. If the law were not protecting her, he would have thrown her out and cursed her with a nasty case of frostbite, but he forced his hands to stay where they were on the throne. Then again, perhaps she wasn't human at all. He could sense magical energy around her, weak, but there, and she had found him so easily, perhaps tracing his own magic. It might do more harm than good to reject her. Travelers were supposed to be good luck, after all.
You may stay, as the law demands.
Thank you. I'll be gone in the morning, so you won't have to worry about me much. What should I do with the bread?
Take it to the kitchen.
Oh! I don't know where that is.
At that moment, Anne's stomach loudly growled. Nicolas covered his mouth with the back of his hand so she couldn't see him frown. He supposed he would have to feed her, too. Letting her starve certainly wouldn't be hospitable, and he didn't want her to think that he didn't have food to spare. He checked his pocket watch. The human was already being a pain, but at least it was nearly time for evening tea anyway.
Would you care for tea?
Yes! I don't think I've ever had tea, but I'm willing to give it a try. What does it taste like?
The frost cherry rose from his throne and walked to the kitchen without answering. She followed behind him, her feet occasionally sliding on the ice floor. The kitchen was perhaps his most prized room. Nicolas had fitted it with all manner of enchantments and spells so he could enjoy warm tea and confections without causing the castle to melt around him. He gestured to the small table placed near the oven.
Please, sit. The tea will be ready shortly.
Nicolas set the kettle on the stove and retrieved 2 bags of rose tea, placing them in the teacups. They didn't match, of course. He'd never felt the need to buy his teacups in sets, as he never had company. Now the mix-matched cups bothered him a little.
Are you royalty?
Of a sort.
What sort? And you haven't told me your name yet.
I am Nicolas Rasmussen, Prince of the Frost Fairies, ruler of the season of winter, second eldest ruler of the Northern Realm. You may address me as any one of my titles.
Your titles, not your name?
Of course not, unless you have a title of your own, which I highly doubt. Are you a witch?
No, I'm not a witch. I'm just Anne.
As I thought.
The magic he sensed must be coming from an enchanted amulet, the purse maybe. The crystals that studded the flap were more than indicative of that. She most likely did not have any actual powers like most humans, and she probably had nothing worthwhile to offer him in that case. But the law was the law, and there was no going back on it now.
How about I call you Your Majesty?
Your Highness.
You don't have to call me Your Highness. Just Anne is fine.
Nicolas didn't understand what was so funny. He focused on the kettle, which would take some time to whistle. An ordinary human peasant had found and gained access to his home. He would have to find a way to make sure that this did not happen again. How had she managed to get through the gate?
Where should I sleep?
Any of the unlocked rooms.
Any of them? But the castle is huge.
Then it will not be difficult for you to stay out of my way.
But how am I going to know which doors are unlocked?
They will not be locked.
For some reason, this caused her to break into a wide smile. Was something he said amusing to her? He had not meant to be, and he was not sure how to feel about her smiling like that. It didn't seem derogatory, but one could never be too sure. The kettle finally whistled, and Nicolas poured the boiling water into the cups, letting it steep for a few minutes before serving the tea and a thick slice of bread to Anne. In the brief moments it took for him to walk from the stove to the table, the tea was already cool enough to drink safely. Not even the gloves he wore could prevent Nicolas's naturally cold aura from chilling the liquid, but that suited him just fine. Nicolas intended to take his tea in the study rather than remain in the woman's company for another moment, but she continued to speak, and only a rude host would leave the room while the guest was talking to him.
Are you alone here?
I enjoy solitude. Besides which, there is nothing wrong with being alone. And what of you? Were you not alone?
I have been alone. And being alone wasn't bad at all, but I'm much happier here with you than I was out there. Alone.
You are happy here?
Yes. Why wouldn't I be? This castle is incredible. There's snow outside to play in, and I'm having tea with a real, actual fairy prince. How could anyone find a way to be unhappy here?
How indeed. If they only saw things the way I do.
He cut himself off there. He was getting too emotional, and he hid it behind the teacup for another sip, only for the frozen solid tea to clack against his teeth when he tilted the cup.
Can I see it?
See what?
What you see.
I doubt it. Once you finish your bread, I will try to show you what I mean.
Anne shoved the bread slice into her mouth and tore off almost half of it in one bite, which she chewed only a few times before swallowing. The other half was gone just as quickly and washed down with the remaining tea. Nicolas would have to remember not to allow his hand to stray near her mouth while she was eating.
If you will, accompany me back to the throne room.
Anne jumped up from her seat and slid toward the kitchen's entrance, back down the hallway and to the throne room. The fact that she had mastered moving around on the ice flooring so soon was commendable, but Nicolas never did anything at anyone's pace but his own, and he calmly walked to the throne room. He couldn't tell if Anne was shaking from the cold or excitement, and he inwardly scoffed at the fact that she was only wearing a sweater to protect herself from the frigid temperature. He did not relish the idea of removing her frozen corpse from the castle grounds, but offering her a proper coat would be beyond the base requirements of hospitality. A gift like that would mean welcoming her to stay indefinitely. Nicolas fluttered his wings and the air around them chilled. He concentrated on making a small cloud just big enough to fit in the palm of his hands and drop a few flakes. Anne stared with wide eyes as the cloud formed and the bits of snow fell into his open hands. Within a few minutes the cloud dispersed, and Nicolas let the collected flakes fall to become part of the floor, only for Anne to catch them instead.
It's cold!
Of course. What else did you expect?
The snowflakes remained in Anne's hands for only a few moments before they melted into a tiny puddle and dripped onto the floor, freezing almost instantly once more.
That was fun. I don't see how anyone could get tired of that.
But you did not see it. Snowflakes are more than fun.
I've never seen snowfall before. I thought it was wonderful.
That is not the point. It melted too quickly for you to see it correctly. Your hands were too warm. Everyone else is too warm.
It was still amazing to me. If it's possible, could we tour the castle? I'd like to see more of it. Maybe then I'll understand.
It is not possible. The castle is far too large, and I feel the beginnings of a headache. If you must be escorted, then I will show you to the empty rooms you may sleep in, but no further.
That's fine. I'm feeling pretty tired. I wouldn't mind going to bed.
Nicolas held back a sigh of relief and led her up the stairs behind the throne to the western corridor. Door frames lined the hallway, but between their arches were solid slabs of ice. However, Anne could see that there were rooms beyond those transparent walls.
How?
Hush.
He tapped the center of one of the slabs, and it split in a neat line down the middle to form a pair of double doors that slid open with ease. The room beyond contained just a few wooden furnishings, a bed, a wardrobe, and a nightstand, all carved with images of the woods and snowflakes. The room itself was large and had its own adjoining bathroom. Anne pressed her hand on the mattress to test it. Thankfully it wasn't made of ice, but was instead soft, warm, and covered with goose-down pillows and thick fur blankets.
Thank you.
I trust you can find your way back to the kitchen for breakfast. Now, make it the parlor, down the hall. That is a more proper room for tea. Be there shortly after dawn. Do not be late, and do not break anything. If you need me, I will be in my study in the east wing.
He left the room, closing the door behind him. Anne removed her boots and bag, then changed into one of the long wool nightgowns that hung in the wardrobe. She crawled into bed, tired from walking for so long. Even just resting her legs for a while felt wonderful. Sleep was slow to come, and as Anne laid awake in the bed and stared up at the ceiling, she became keenly aware of how high up it was. Looking around, she realized that everything was far away, and the almost empty room filled her with loneliness. She slipped out of the bed and walked into the hallway to get away from the bareness for a moment. It was only a guest bedroom, and judging from Nicolas's comments about solitude, he didn't have much of a need to fill it. However, she found more of the same in the hallway. When she thought about it, the throne room was that way too. Despite the immaculate detail of the decor and furniture in every room, there was no life in any of it. The whole palace was empty. Anne began to understand Nicolas's surprise at the idea that anyone could be happy there. She went back to her room, curled up under the blankets, and closed her eyes tightly while thinking of the forest, the flowers, and the sun that she dearly missed. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. This was a major project, and I am so grateful for the people who came together to make it a reality, including our talented voice actors and our audio editor. You should see their names on screen now. This is just a sample of larger projects that I'd like to do in the future if we're able to fund them. I wouldn't necessarily call these audiobooks because they aren't directly reading the text, but more adapting the text for an audio format, so more like an audio adaptation. This is something that I would love to do for all of our books in full, so if you're interested in supporting that, please do check out the link to our Patreon in the description. And while you're there, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more like this, and check out the other links to my bookstore and social media accounts. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time, Rose Garden.